for those that are watching and those that are going to be watching it by download, as noted, I'm Daniel SINC, and this has been Ben. How do I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yeah, it's just thank you for asking. It's the traditional pronunciation is Desjardins, but it's just Desjardins, been anglicized over the generations.
All right. I didn't want to butcher it too bad, and then you cringe over it. But again, Ben, big partner of SINC with Snyk, VP of marketing. He leads the team that really drives the intersection of AppSec marketing with Snyk strategy and direction. Really gets in depth into the extensive market research into trends, emerging needs of developers, application security teams, and as Ben and I were talking about, he's got over 25. He doesn't look this old, but he's got over 25 years of experience in the B2B tech cybersecurity marketing team in that space as well. That God, you left teams at RSA, VeriSign, Radware, Archer. I don't know if I'm name dropping all of them, if I'm leaving any out, but been around the block a little bit, so you know the space pretty well.
Once or twice, yes.
So, I mean, I could, as I could talk for days on this topic, but let me throw it over to you. I'll let you run with it. Obviously, Q&A is going to be very vital. In the background, Ben, I'm going to go off camera. I'll aggregate a lot of the questions, and about 5-10 minutes with lead time into the back end. Come on, bring you some of the questions that if there's any that you haven't answered yet.
Yeah, sounds great, Dan, and thanks for the intro, and thanks to everybody that's able to join today and the folks that access the recording in the future. Like you said, Dan, I mean, this topic of AI is unavoidable. I mean, you can't get probably more than 2 or 3 posts into your LinkedIn feed before you're getting hit with the AI message. And, it has some elements of, kind of buzz to it, obviously, but it's an incredibly relevant topic for really important reasons. And so one of the things we've been exploring here at Snyk are these concepts of fitness and readiness for AI, specifically around the use of AI generative code tools. And so I'm going to dive a little bit into what those topics mean to us, and also share some research that we've been doing on the topic. So let's jump right in. So, again, just to reinforce, I don't think anybody on this webinar needs to be reminded of the prevalence and pace with which AI is being adopted, over 2 times the pace of some of the early internet adoption. Definitely see, as Dan alluded to, I've been in the space for a long time, and as, the evolution of security and its intersection with the internet and the different ways that organizations wanted to leverage the internet, I see a lot of similarities. In terms of the sort of community's approach of understanding the technology's potential, but also its risks, which we think is critical, because as we say here on the right side of the screen, this is not a can we, should we, this is a we have to. All organizations are going to have to adopt AI in different components of their business, including, but certainly not limited to, code generation and software development, to stay innovative and to stay ahead of the curve and stay in front of competition. So, not, again, like I said, not a if, but really a when and a how as it relates to AI adoption. So we started developing these concepts of AI fitness and AI wellness, ultimately trying to understand, are you in fact ready to innovate fast and yet do that in a secure manner? So let's touch on fitness first, the sort of, body readiness, organizational body readiness, if you will. Have you started thinking about the areas that AI are going to touch your organization? And I think we obviously at Snyk take a very close look at AI's overlap and implications for application development and the security implications of that intersection. Have you started to build out a pilot program that will not only focus in on the risks, but also, make sure you're focusing in on the benefits that you expect to get through the application of AI? And then do you have the right tools in place? And it's not just tools, right? I mean, it's people, process, and technology as usual to help you identify and organize and remediate the risks that will be introduced into your organization as you embrace AI. So AI fitness, the sort of organizational body readiness, and then there's the sort of organizational mental readiness, the wellness aspect of this. And so this is, a very long list of things to be considered here. But, is there executive buy-in? And is the buy-in really tied to, again, not just we have to do this because everybody's doing it, but are you getting to that level of understanding the outcomes you expect and how those drive quantitative benefits to the business around innovation? Are the approaches that you're taking to adopting AI aligned with those expected benefits? If you've identified what you see as the operational or organizational benefits of AI, ensure that the early approaches you take have those connection points out. And then very critically, like I always think of urgency, and what's driving the sense of urgency within organizations around AI adoption is really central to this wellness concept. Are the drivers for urgency well tempered by the recognition and need for controls? And this is an area that we've been doing a lot of exploring with customers, prospects, partners, others in the area. And so, in just introducing that concept, I would love to just get the group's quick feedback. And so I'll launch a quick poll here to get the group's feedback on how do you think about your organization, or maybe what have you seen in general with organizations that you've worked with across these concepts in fitness and wellness? Are you sort of high on the wellness meter, but you got a lot of work to do to get the body ready to take on and embrace that challenge? Or maybe vice versa, you've taken some initial steps to put the controls in place, but you've got to drive better alignment on why we're doing this and what the urgency is and what are the outcomes that we want. Or are you sort of nicely balanced in this area of fitness and wellness? So I'll give you all just a minute to reply. And we've got responses coming in. So it looks like they're mostly centering on number one. There's an eagerness to adopt this, but a lot of work to do to make sure that the organization is ready to address the challenges and the risks associated with it. So thank you all for that feedback. I would say that this is not at all unlike what we've seen from a lot of the interactions that we've had, and I'll share some details on the survey that we've done. But let me just touch on why this matters. I think having that strong appetite, and so this sort of, I think, well represents a lot of the feedback we got there on the poll, that there's overwhelmingly, and so this is a data point from Gartner, there's a belief that the benefits of generative AI are going to outweigh the risks, and a very small percentage of people that feel that the risks outweigh the benefits. Now, certainly I think longer term, this absolutely is the sort of the point of optimism that I think organizations should have, but also a recognition that if not done in the right ways, in the right manner, there are some challenges associated with it. Some of those challenges have to do with when you have that high sense of urgency. We know this as a fact. All of us as business technologists are going to identify opportunities, resources to make our work more efficient. And another Gartner data point, there's a high percentage of those people that will bypass the guidance, the policies that are in place. And so I think organizations need to expect this shadow generative AI reality as they continue to look at opportunities to embrace AI. Recognize that in many cases, a lot of this is already going on. And this is important to tackle, right? Because what we do know, what we have already seen from a number of studies, both in academia as well as in the industry, that this is a path that will proliferate and increase the volume of vulnerabilities. We can see that Copilot, when aligned as an element of AI code generation, is increasing the frequency of CWEs and really creating inherently weaker software. And so these things need to be tackled not only because of the increased rate, but the increased volume of software development that's enabled by AI coding tools. So our thought was, hey, I like Gartner data and industry or academic research as much as anybody, but we at Snyk felt like, let's kind of do our own study on these specific concepts around AI fitness and wellness. And so we started down this path of building out a study. And just to give you a little bit of background on the methodology here. So we went out to about 400 organizations, 1,000 employees and up. These were, not just Snyk customers. This was really out to the market at large, good cross-section of industries that you'd expect, the ones that typically are heavily involved in application development, and a concentration in North America. And so as we entered this, and again, like at an abstract level, we're trying to get a feel for 3 different personas and how they think about these concepts of fitness and wellness. We focused in on the C-suite, which was a combination in reality of CISOs and CTOs, the application security teams, and the developers themselves. And our hypothesis was that we would see a very high urgency and a sense of readiness coming from the developers. We would see a sense of urgency from the C-suite, in many cases driven by kind of board pressure to embrace AI and use it as a lever for innovation. And the security team sort of stuck in the middle, understanding the challenges and concerns from a security perspective, but also trying to address and get their arms around the urgency and the inevitability to some degree of developer adoption of these technologies. Sometimes hypotheses ring true and sometimes they don't, and so in reality, what we ended up seeing is a lot of alignment on some of these questions around fitness and wellness. Definitely some divergent areas, kind of on the fringes of the extremes of reaction, and I'll get into some of that. And to some degree, some of that alignment was good. I think there was some positive alignment around a shared awareness level on the current usage, and specifically we asked the unauthorized use of AI coding tools, and a general common sense of urgency and urgency drivers. What is driving the urgency? The overall urgency, interestingly, was a little lower on the developer side, and I'll touch on that just a little bit more later in the presentation. Some of what we saw was a little bit concerning, sort of a collective shrug on policies, I would say, inaction on what was identified as the top barrier to adoption for AI technology, and what we feel like is a light area of due diligence. And so we'll get into these three in a little more detail. I always say the data is really valuable, but it's really around the discussion that you drive and the application. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But to launch a second poll, I'm interested to see how these results compare with what you're experiencing or what you've heard or seen in this industry as it relates to AI adoption. So I've launched that second poll, and I'll give a minute for replies. So we have some replies coming in, and what we're seeing is a pretty comparable to, so number 2 being selected. What we see is kind of a fairly typical reaction to those questions, which is interesting. And so let's get into kind of the next level of detail. I love this quote. It's often attributed to Mark Twain, but it's actually Mark Twain was referencing Benjamin Disraeli, who was a 19th century prime minister of the UK, who called out that there's 3 kinds of lies, damned lies, and statistics, which I always interpret as, the point of this is that the statistics really require some additional discussion, some analysis and interpretation to really think about how they fit contextually into how you're trying to apply the data to, operationally or strategically some aspect of your business. We had the benefit and privilege yesterday, in fact, in New York City, of hosting about 30, 35, ranging from CISOs down into, and as well as over into development, DevOps, and went through this very data set. And so what I'm going to share with you is, some specifics on those data points, as well as what we got in terms of the discussion area and some of the takeaways that we took from that discussion. In that discussion, I sort of presented the option to select from a range of findings. And the 3 that we'll go through in a little more detail are the sense that the C-suite is underestimating the risk associated with AI adoption and overestimating the organization's readiness. I'll go through each of these in a little more detail. They're aware of current AI use, but they feel like policies are effective. This was across the board and across all 3 personas. And that the level of preparation for launching and using these tools seems like it could definitely benefit from some increased rigor. Let's get into the first one first. The first finding, the C-suite underestimating risk, overestimating readiness. So when we ask the question, how would you rate your organization's security risk from the use of AI coding tools? Interestingly, the C-suite had a 5 times higher response to not risky at all than the application security teams. Some hypotheses for that is the application security teams are on the front lines of seeing the code that's being generated by these AI coding tools. So they probably have a heightened sensitivity and, frankly, better visibility into the code quality and the potential security implications. The next question, also related to this overall finding, how would you rate your organization's readiness? And the C-suite was twice as likely as developers, believe it or not, to say that their organization was extremely ready for AI. So we see this sense of urgency, coming from the C-suite. In our discussions yesterday, we said, well, okay, well, and I mentioned earlier, our C-suite category was a combination of CTO and CISO. So we pulled that apart a little bit using responses to, kind of job responsibility as opposed to title. Interestingly, we did not see a very big difference between the response to these questions from the CTO perspective or the CISO perspective. We also think that, what is probably driving this is the C-suite has visibility into the overall drive and urgency and push around AI, not just specific to coding. And so I think it's inevitable that their response to this question that is very AI coding tool specific gets influenced by the overall AI focus within the organization. So finding number two, the awareness level of current use of AI is very high, yet they cite policies as being effective. So on that first data point, over 60% across all personas acknowledge that there's use of unauthorized AI coding tools within their. Yet when we ask them to describe their organization's security policies for AI coding tools, 2 out of 3 describe them as adequate, which, this seems very at odds at the surface level. And so in yesterday's conversation, what we discussed is, well, why would that be? And what I took from that conversation is generally the community feeling like they don't have the level of guidance that they typically might in terms of what are the right ways to build policies that are going to be effective in balancing the pace and velocity benefits of AI code adoption relative to the risks associated with it. Specifically, there was some discussion around regulation in this area, probably being somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 years behind the current needs and addressing some of the challenges that organizations are already starting to see as they embrace AI coding tools. And our third finding, the level of preparation for use. So we asked, what preparation steps has your organization taken before adopting AI coding tools? What struck us most in that response was that fewer than 20% said that they were running proofs of concept around these AI coding tools, which just seemed like an incredibly low rate. Then we started to ask, well, what are the barriers to adoption for these coding tools? And security was number one. So we have this situation where security is acknowledged as a very high barrier, the number one barrier for adoption and driving adoption of these tools. Yet there are not measures taken at appropriate levels to ensure that the adoption is done securely. And then let's take another important piece, training, developer training. So what percentage of developers receive training on how to use the tools? And 2 out of 3 developers acknowledge that less than half of the development teams where they have started to embrace AI coding tools have actually received that training. So in yesterday's discussion, we talked through, there was just universal agreement that proofs of concept are an important point around AI code adoption, not only for the purposes of identifying the risks, but also for the purposes of getting aligned on the benefits and establishing KPIs for measuring the benefits and, again, proving out the concept from a value perspective. There was also a good bit of discussion around developers and the need to ensure that as part of what developers receive from a training perspective around AI isn't just these sort of security checks and vulnerability sensitivities, but also understanding how to develop their strategies around prompting AIs and LLMs, because that's a key aspect of ultimately getting what you want, but also having a sense of where that input is coming from a code perspective. So those were the 3 top ones that the group yesterday voted on. We did have some interesting conversation around some developer-specific areas. Again, to me, I think there's going into the research study, we had that hypothesis that developers would be sort of putting the security concerns to the side. And in fact, that wasn't the case at all. When we asked the question around how these different personas feel about the security quality of AI-generated code, developers were 30% more likely than the C-suite to call it out as just okay or bad, the sort of 2 lowest levels of qualification for that question. And then the second piece around this, kind of related to this maybe misperception around developers and urgency, was when asked about what's driving the urgency for AI adoption. Again, overall, I think there was pretty balanced scores here and a pretty balanced sense of overall urgency. But there was a sense the board had that the developers were cited as the #1 driver, the developers' urgency to have these tools. Yet developers themselves didn't have that same, that same level of urgency called out, and so there's a bit of a disconnect there in terms of the urgency drivers. So we think these findings always require additional analysis, and that is the research was completed a couple weeks ago. We finished our analysis last week. This week with this session and yesterday's session, we're in those early stages of rolling out and getting team feedback, and I think it's driven us to a set of specific recommendations that we would put out there for any organization that is looking at AI code generation adoption. And again, going back to the early point, this is a must for organizations eventually. So set up that formal POC process. As I said, don't just consider the risks associated with the adoption of these tools, but also make sure that the team is aligned on what success looks like as you start to adopt these tools, and that sort of wellness aspect balanced with the fitness aspect. Listen to the AppSec team's input. So where we did see divergence across personas responses, typically what we were seeing is a heightened sensitivity from the application security team. And again, for me, they probably have the ideal view of understanding what the real risk appetite is of the organization and what the expectations are from a security perspective, as well as having better visibility, certainly than the C-suite, into the results of AI-generated code. It's really important as you establish these pilots around AI code generation that you are collecting, cataloging, and analyzing what you're seeing as bad results. Now, bad results might be the combination of code needing to be addressed or fixed from a vulnerability perspective, as well as fix recommendations. So increasingly, as automated fix driven by AI and LLM becomes more prevalent, understanding which recommendations we're not taking can help inform those LLM models. And then finally, I think a big reason we did this research is we see a vital aspect of success for adoption of these tools aligned around ensuring you've got these personas consistently discussing it. So keep those functions engaged through the process. Would recommend regular pulse surveys on what your organization identifies as kind of the key aspects around. If you categorize it as fitness or wellness, great, but whatever you feel like are the sort of operational benefits balanced by the challenges that the teams are seeing as you move down the path towards adoption.
Ben, can I ask you a question on that? When you talk about adoption, where is the barrier of entry? I mean, where does it usually die on the vine? I mean, how is this something that you have to go to the board of directors and explain to them of why it's necessary? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that boards aren't needing so much an explanation of why AI adoption is necessary. I actually get the sense that right now the dialogue's a little inversed. That there's more pressure coming to the C-suite and the organization from the board, because everywhere they look, they're being presented by the glamorous results of AI adoption, including by competitors. So that creates a sense of pressure. I think it's a little early, Dan, to say like where these things are dying on the vine. I think what we're seeing is the early indicators of some risks that need to be addressed. If you kind of go back to some of that CWE data that I presented earlier, I don't know that I don't know that any organization can afford to let these things die on the vine, and I think that sort of reinforces that #4 recommendation in terms of keeping the key stakeholders engaged. I will say, one thing that came up in our conversations yesterday is sort of after some initial use, and this varied by the seniority of developers, is sort of like, I don't know, I don't know how much this is helping me or not, which again, I think kind of gets back to that prompt strategy piece. So I think that's an important piece to keep an eye on, because ultimately, as it relates to AI code generation tools, the ultimate user of those is going to be the developers. So having your finger on the pulse of how they're feeling about it from a productivity standpoint, I'd say is key.
So when we talk about the developers, I mean, that's a couple layers down from the board of directors. Talk to me a little bit about the ROI and how you justify, the investment and, where you see the payoff coming, to that level.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main sort of return aspect of the ROI calculation that I see most organizations talking about is velocity. development velocity, would closely tied to keeping your organization innovative and competitive. So I think that's the key one that's focused on. And the investment levels on this sort of overall category of AI obviously vary, but the barriers of an entry from an AI code generation perspective are very low. Hence the need, that dynamic creates pressure of high potential return, relatively low sort of surface level investment creates a sense of urgency. Again, making the need for a formal POC process and a lot of thought that goes into guardrails for the AI adoption process is a really vital aspect of this.
It's the old riddle of when velocity and innovation, like the crossroads of which is going to outpace the other. So, well, I'm excited about what you guys are doing over there. I mean, I know from other virtual roundtables and webinars that the need for it and the demand for it, and just overall your organization, people saying, I didn't know you guys did all of that, is just been tremendous, the feedback. So, hopefully this lends to a lot of insight into an ever changing and a fast paced, changing world that we live in. So, Ben, I know, your time is of essence always. So thank you for, spending some time with us today and downloading.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks to the audience. We always appreciate the opportunities to share these insights and, encourage organizations to engage, to understand more. As you said, Snyk is definitely very active in this space in terms of providing the guardrails for AI code adoption, as well as leveraging AI as a means of prioritizing and quickly fixing. So grateful for the opportunity. Thanks.
Again, everyone that's online right now, thank you for downloading and joining us for it. And again, Ben, thanks for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
All right. Everyone have a great afternoon. And again,